Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we are coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. And today on Ancient Secrets Revealed, I want to talk about, I've been in these mountains now for over 20 years, I guess pushing 25 years. And when I first came here, I remember, people, oh, you're moving to the Bible Belt, and it's really conservative and kind of narrow-minded or what have you. But my experience has been really great, and I just wanted to share with you, particularly with respect to the, the Southern Baptist ministers. And I've had the opportunity, one reason or another. One of them was actually laying the cement blocks as a part-time job, or I don't know, he just did it for exercise. I don't really know. But he had his own church in the valley around Asheville. And I just went to check on my house one day, and he was there working. And I said, oh, hi, I said, I'm the owner, And it was interesting. He said, oh, you're the owner, And I said, yeah. Well, I've been wanting to talk to you. And I said, oh, great. I didn't know. And he said, I want to know what's going on here. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I said, you mean Asheville? He said, no, here. And I said, you mean Elk Mountain? He said, no, here. I said, you mean this house? And he said, yeah. And I didn't know. I'm building a house, And he said, I have one question for you. He said, do you believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? He was ready to get in a tussle, And I said, well, if you mean Jesus, the man, the chunk of flesh, I said, no, I don't believe that. But if you mean Jesus, the Christ, meaning that he knew that who and what he was in the depth of his being was the Christ Spirit. I said, then, yeah, absolutely, I do. I mean, in my mind, the Christ is just, a term that some use for the, what in the Vedic tradition they call Chaitanya, or the absolute, the unified field, the transcendent, And yeah, and he said, well, do you think he's the only way? And I said, well, again, if you mean the chunk of flesh, no, I don't believe that. But if you mean the Christ Spirit is the only way, I said, absolutely. I said, there's only one. And he knew he was that, And then he said something. Oh, and then I said, but if you mean that chunk of flesh was the only way, and so nobody could ever get to heaven until after he was born, then no, I don't believe that. But I believe that the Christ that he knew he was eternal. And so it wasn't about if he was born in a physical body or not. And then I said, then in that case, yeah, I believe all of that, And anyway, the conversation went on like that. And it got really deep and very profound. And it was great. And at the end of the conversation, he felt way better. And he said, I'd like you to come and talk at my parish, at my church down in the valley, which I thought was, quite amazing and quite an honor. Another time, this was even a much longer conversation because I got on the plane. I was teaching a class in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I got on the plane flying back here to Asheville. So the flight, through Atlanta was 4.5, 5 hours. And that's wheels up to wheels down to wheels up to wheels down, So we were sitting there talking for probably more like 5.5 hours. And it was a great conversation. I sat in my seat, and then I saw this guy walk in, and he had like I forget what musical instrument it was or what have you, fiddle or whatever. And he put it in the overhead, and then he sat down next to me and we talked a little bit. Turns out he's a Baptist minister. And it was amazing. I mean, I went way into, karma and free will and predetermination and so much of the stuff that I talk about in this podcast, and he could not get enough. He loved it. And he was a deep thinker. You could tell he was very pensive and really wanted, nobody ever totally understands God, of course. I mean, he goes on forever. But he was so intrigued and so appreciative and so thankful to me, really, for so much of the stuff I had to say. And he's a really nice guy. But the thing that really impressed me more than anything was just what deep thinkers both of these guys were. And since that time, I have met, several other Southern Baptist ministers that I can think of. And the conversations with all of them have been fantastic. And then one time, there were three of them that came up to the temple, came to Mount Summit together, and were just thrilled to meet me. Obviously, they had read my stuff or whatever, and they were just joyous about the whole thing, So, now being Christmas, Merry Christmas, everybody. And I think it's really appropriate, to talk about that and to understand that. And there's another component here that I think a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people are down on Christianity. And, the way they were brought up, their exposure to Christianity was about, some guy sitting on a cloud and Jesus with all these things that they consider impossible. And so they just kind of reject the whole thing. And that's epidemic right now, isn't it, in the world? Isn't it, Scotty?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the people that had been running the show have kind of messed it up, to say the least.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of the people that are running the government and that, I mean, there's a lot in the news, at least, of different groups turning on the Christians, turning on the Catholics, and now, of course, turning on the Jews. But a couple of things are going on there. One of them, it's almost become vogue right now to sort of, latch on to a, kind of contrary paradigm, a viewpoint to things, and to just kind of latch on to the opposite side of the mainstream, and that's what you believe, and it becomes almost fanatical that that's the answer and everything else is wrong. I almost feel like that's kind of a result of sort of the drug culture mentality that's really, when you think about it, permeated our nation. I mean, if you just look at the amount of drugs that are pouring into the country, and just do the math. I mean, the average American consumes so many recreational drugs a year. It's phenomenal. And so what does that do? I mean, there's plenty of literature out on it that, people become antisocial, contrary. They find their own little cliques, and everybody else is crazy in their mind, and that's what's going on. And so you combine that with this sort of atheistic attitude, and it's really because of a lack of understanding of a deeper spirituality. And then there's the whole historical accounting that, they're the Gnostics, which were the people of knowledge, and there's still tons of untranslated volumes, huge volumes. I forget, they were saying how many thousand years it would take to translate it all. And it's just archived away in these libraries in, Saudi Arabia or wherever, and nothing's being done with them to speak of. But they were the ones that were the real deep thinkers, and a lot of the deep knowledge of Christianity is there. And then the argument is that then the church wanted power, and so that's where it came into, God doesn't dwell within you, God dwells within the church, and so there's a lot of arguments back and forth about that and the political thing. And so then you get these atheists in there and this contrary mentality in there, and what nets out is that so many people are just rejecting religion and rejecting spirituality, and it's a horrible shame. There is a deeper knowledge, and it's consistent with rational thought. Uh, and so now you see you have two components to spirituality. You have the Gnostics, the intellectual component, and you also have the bhakti, the emotional component. And in a really integrated sort of mentality, it's the left and right side of the brain, isn't it? When those two things come together and work in harmony, then you're evolving. It's a good thing. But people get off on so many different tangents, and the atheists get off on a tangent because they can't get past their rejection of a superficial understanding of Christianity that was imposed upon them. And I guess a big point of this podcast is that when you really talk to the real deep leaders that I've met, certainly within the arena of Christianity, these guys are thoughtful. These people are deep. They're reflective. They're insightful. And so there's a unity in the midst of diversity, at the top, if you will, between different religions, because the spiritual depth of those individuals is quite sophisticated, you know. So there's a unity in the midst of diversity. But now let's look at religion, because what is religion really? Religion has two components. One is the spiritual. The other component is cultural. And to really understand the value of that, we have to understand the importance of cultural integrity. I mean, even if you look at different animal species, elephants, gorillas, birds, there's a certain, in fact, boy, we have a number of crows around here, which is really considered auspicious. And I've become friends with them, and, I put once a week on Saturdays, I feed them, and things like that. And so I've been watching them, and they have a very interesting community, and that community feeds them all, obviously. It's like they work together, they live together, they communicate together, and it's really entertaining to watch them. And the point being that there's a cultural integrity there, even among birds, that feeds their health. And humans are the same way. They say that elephants can't exist by themselves. They are that dependent on the cultural integrity. They need to be with other elephants. And really human beings are the same way. And what cultures then the integrity of a group of humans is what we call cultural integrity. It's largely based that's one component of religion. So religion has two components. One component is spirituality, ideally a deep understanding of spirituality, and an appreciation for cultural integrity. But what's going on now, and back to the drug mentality culture that's prevalent in the world today, it's all anti-anarchy, atheist, and what it does is it degrades the integrity of the culture. And I've cited in the past the whole Boxer Rebellion in China, when the East India Company was infiltrating China with drugs, and it really destroyed the integrity of the culture. And people are arguing that that's what the Chinese now are doing in America, is infiltrating with all these drugs and things, and it's degrading the people, degrading the public, and then infiltrating the educational institutions and giving paradigms it's vogue to be contrary, and so people are clinging on to a contrary perspective. And that too degrades the integrity of the culture. And it's become vogue, to do that. A deep thinker isn't really a deep thinker anymore. A deep thinker is a rebel that's, hung their hat on some paradigm and decided that that's the truth, So the mind, we have to understand that the mind, you can justify anything with the mind. You cannot justify anything with that superficial intellect. But the real intellect is something that lies deeper. Uh, uh, it's actually structured in the very fabric of creation, the very fabric of existence. And so when we detach ourselves from that deeper value of the self and kind of start to get indoctrinated or uh, caught up in more of a superficial mentality and a paradigm that comes along with that, it degrades our lives, degrades our culture, degrades our understanding of religion and spirituality. And so the path of evolution is a path of discernment. And discernment isn't something that's done with the mind. The mind is just a reflection of a discernment that goes deeper into the intuitive felt sense, the finer feeling levels. So you have the transcendental depth, and then you have this level of buddhi, which is, intellect, but not intellect in the way we think of it, but the intellect that structures the very nature of existence. And then as we interface with that, it comes up not as concrete thoughts, but as reason. Things, we reason our way through life. Things become more reasonable. And that's a physiological process. And so then as we cultivate, this is the path of discernment. You see, we cultivate the ability to reason, the ability to then to discern, and that becomes then an ability to think in a manner that's consistent with nature, Mother Nature, and our own true nature. And then our mind then is an expression, an articulation, if you will, of that deeper understanding of life. But when you disconnect from that, the mind can go off in a million different directions, and that's what's really going on in the world today. So I think we do well, particularly now. I mean, it's the Christmas season in the West, and it's a time where we re-enliven, we give more space to the deeper understanding of spirituality, the deeper values of cultural integrity. And we realize then that in one sense, then it doesn't matter who is Christ. It doesn't matter if he walked on water or not. It doesn't matter in this sense now, please understand that. In this sense, none of that matters. What really matters in the sense we're speaking now of cultural integrity is that it feeds the individual, it feeds the family, it feeds the community, it feeds the nation. And we rest into that and we celebrate that. And we realize how deeply those values are cultured within each individual. And that's what they mean by a culture and cultural integrity. And so, yeah, it's the idea of unity in the midst of diversity. There are other religions, different religions, and we honor them, we respect them. That's all well and good. But it's not how we've been cultured as individuals. And that could be if you're, Jewish, or if you're Christian, or if you're Hindu, or whatever. My personal preference, I mean, I was brought up Christian, my favorite holiday is Christmas. It is. It just fills my heart, really. But what I really like about the Vedic tradition is that the rigor of the intellectual understanding, and then the expressions of that, even through the Gandharva Veda music or all these different values, they're so deeply integrated and seamlessly integrated, and full expressions, even on the surface of life, full expressions that are integrated fully with nature, with Mother Nature, with a person's own true nature. But to hear that, and then to just say, "Oh, okay, great, that's the direction I'm going," and then people reject their own cultural integrity, that's a mistake too. So we're talking about unity in the midst of diversity. When I was around my teacher, he was incredible, because he would interface with different cultures, with different groups, even different nations. And it's really just a matter of perception, He would just spontaneously, he wouldn't have to even think about it. He would spontaneously feel into the integrity that was there and relate to that and support that, but still maintaining his own cultural integrity at the same time, you see? And that's the direction the world needs to go. And that certainly is the Christmas spirit, isn't it? And that's basically what I have to say on this holiday season. Scotty, anything else?
One of the things that I kind of remember from the past talking in this is about how, like you were mentioning about how Jesus walked on water or he performed these miracles or something.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, was that was kind of the way that they conveyed the message or got people to understand deeper about what he was about.
Well, yeah, back then and also now. I mean, a lot of people are like, they think those miracles are essential to appreciating Jesus, and that's fine, except that it shouldn't be contingent upon that. And then there are these, you see it on the History Channel, that a lot of the things they claim, like the Bethlehem, the Star of Bethlehem and things like that, and they'll claim that, well, that was just a takeoff on the what the Romans were doing with the birth of the different Caesars or whatever. And so much of what was said about Christ was said about these Roman leaders, and so it's kind of like, well, they were just trying to match that. And I'm not saying either way. What I am saying is that by his teachings, Christ by his teachings, and what we can take from his teachings are what's most important. And some people are saying, well, if UFOs turn out to be real and there are all these different beings that are intellectual and even smarter than we are, it'll be the end of Christianity. And I say that's so ridiculous, because there's a unified field that's underlying everything, and that is, from the Christian point of view, the Christ spirit. That's the word they give to it, and that's great. And it's the unified field. It's the one thing that underlies everything. And so, if there are UFO people out there, this would just broaden our appreciation of the depth and breadth and huge expanse of the Christ spirit. So really what it amounts to is just a more, I guess it's okay to say a more mature relationship, a more mature understanding of spirituality and cultural integrity. And this is a season for Christians to celebrate that. Was that responsive, Scotty?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was a good point.
Yeah, it's
okay.
Like the languages that are used to explain that,
the language and the culture through which it's expressed. It's expressed, different terms with different leaders, what have you. And again, what I really like about the Vedic tradition is that the rigor, the depth of the understanding, the sophistication of the expressions in the Vedic literature, and that it's just phenomenal, But culturally, you can be a Christian and still appreciate the knowledge that's there in the Veda, and those that are Hindus can appreciate the cultural integrity and the health that it brings to a Western culture. All right, so enjoy the holiday season, everyone, and we'll talk with you again